No one noticed the concrete truck until it was too late. By the time the sun rose fully, the creek behind the quiet home was gone. The neighborhood woke up to silence where water once whispered. Ethan Carter stood at his back fence, staring at a gray slab poured straight through the natural creek that had flowed for decades. The HOA notice on his door claimed it was for landscape uniformity. But Ethan knew this video would reveal a truth far darker than concrete. He had bought the house for that creek. It reminded him of his late wife, who used to sit there every morning with coffee and hope. Now it was buried without warning. When he questioned the HOA board, they smiled politely and handed him fines for unauthorized objections. Neighbors avoided eye contact. The board president, Linda Moore, assured everyone the decision was final. But what no one knew was that the creek was protected land, and Ethan had documents no one expected him to have. As the concrete dried, so did the patience of a man who had already lost everything once. And this time, he wasn't going to stay quiet. Not when the ground itself had a story to tell. The HOA meeting room smelled like cheap coffee and power. Ethan sat alone as board members whispered behind polished smiles. Linda spoke calmly, explaining how the creek was an eyesore lowering property values. The vote had already happened, she said, and resistance would only lead to higher penalties. Ethan listened without interrupting. He remembered his wife reading city letters years ago, warning about protected waterways. After the meeting, he returned home and pulled out an old metal box from the closet. Inside were surveys, permits, and inspection notices tied to the creek. The land wasn't just sentimental. It was legally sensitive. When Ethan emailed the HOA with proof, they responded with a warning letter threatening legal action for harassment. That was the moment something shifted. Neighbors started receiving violation notices for tiny issues. Trash bins, grass length, paint shades. Fear spread quietly. The creek had disappeared, but tension replaced it. One neighbor whispered to Ethan that inspectors had been seen nearby. Linda dismissed it as rumors. But she also ordered fresh landscaping to hide the concrete completely. What she didn't know was that every photo, every email, every threat was being saved. And the city inspector Ethan contacted had a long memory. Rain arrived 3 days later, slow at first, then relentless. Water pooled where the creek once guided it away. Lawns flooded. Driveways shimmered like shallow lakes. The HOA blamed poor weather, but residents knew something was wrong. Ethan watched from his porch as water crept toward foundations. He received another fine for unauthorized drainage concerns. That night, a city truck parked quietly down the street. The inspector walked the area with a flashlight, stopping at the concrete slab. He took photos, notes, and measurements. By morning, Linda sent an email claiming the inspection was routine and nothing would come of it. But fear had entered her voice. The rain continued. And water pushed back against the concrete barrier. Cracks formed. Neighbors demanded answers. The HOA scheduled an emergency meeting, blaming Ethan for causing panic. He stayed silent, letting events unfold. When the inspector returned with another official, they posted a notice on the HOA board's office door. Red lettering. Immediate review. The neighborhood gathered, reading quietly. The creek wasn't just blocked. It had been violated. And the consequences were only beginning. The official notice spread faster than any HOA warning ever had. Residents crowded sidewalks, comparing flooded basements and damaged gardens. Linda tried to regain control, insisting the HOA had approval, but no documents were produced. The city inspector requested records. None matched. The concrete pour had skipped environmental review entirely. Ethan was finally asked to speak. Calmly, he explained the creek's history, the permits his wife had saved, and the warnings the HOA ignored. The room fell silent. For years, residents had trusted the board blindly. Now trust cracked like the concrete outside. The inspector issued a temporary violation, ordering further investigation. HOA funds were frozen pending review. Linda's confidence collapsed into anger, accusing Ethan of betrayal. He didn't respond. Outside, another rainstorm gathered. The neighborhood watched as water surged again, this time forcing evacuation of several homes. Emergency crews arrived. Cameras followed. The story was no longer private. What began as a quiet landscaping decision had turned into a public failure. And the city hadn't even delivered its final verdict yet. News vans lined the entrance the next morning. Reporters spoke of environmental neglect and HOA overreach. Residents shared stories of ignored complaints and intimidation. The city released preliminary findings. The creek was a protected natural channel, and blocking it caused preventable damage. Responsibility fell directly on the HOA board. Emergency funds were ordered for repairs, but HOA accounts were locked. Special assessments loomed. Linda resigned by email, citing stress. Other board members followed. Ethan stood near the creek site as workers began removing concrete. Water slowly returned to its path, muddy but moving. Neighbors thanked him quietly. He never claimed victory. He only watched the flow. The inspector confirmed full penalties were coming, including mandatory restoration and oversight. Property values stabilized once repairs began. The neighborhood felt different now. Less controlled. More awake. Ethan placed a small wooden bench near the creek again. The sound wasn't the same yet, but it was alive. And the final inspection was still days away. The final city report arrived on a Friday afternoon. It confirmed everything Ethan warned about. The HOA was fined heavily, required to rebuild the creek naturally, and permanently stripped of certain powers. New leadership would be monitored by the city for years. Residents gathered as the report was read aloud. There was relief, but also regret. Many admitted they ignored early signs because rules felt safer than questions. The inspector shook Ethan's hand, thanking him for standing firm. As restoration crews worked, wildlife slowly returned. Birds, insects, movement. Life. The concrete was gone completely now. The neighborhood voted to reduce HOA authority, rewriting bylaws together. It felt strange but honest. Ethan finally sat on the bench as water flowed freely again. He remembered his wife's smile and felt something close to peace. What began as loss ended as correction. And the inspection that changed everything wasn't just about land. It was about people remembering they had a voice. Months later, the creek looked stronger than before. Native plants lined its banks, and children played nearby. The HOA still existed, but it no longer ruled through fear. It served. Neighbors spoke freely now, involved instead of silent. Ethan became a quiet symbol, not of rebellion, but of responsibility. When asked why he fought so hard, he simply said the land mattered, and so did the truth. The inspection that changed the neighborhood wasn't luck. It was consequence. Rules meant nothing without accountability. As water continued its steady path, the community learned a lesson no fine could teach. Power unchecked always leaves damage behind. But courage, even quiet courage, can restore what was buried, and that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you loved the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps this channel grow.